One of the hardest things for me has been making games that feel unique or interesting without getting lost or overscoping. It's really easy to confuse content with concepts. See, when we think about original games, we think about content. We want to take our favorite games and add ideas we wish that they had. But really, you're just making a sequel. The truth is, games are all copies of each other. What makes them different is what they copy and what they change. Slowly adding and taking away until you have something completely brand new. See, adding a weapon is not a new concept. Changing a weapon can be a new concept. Right now, I'm currently doing a game a month challenge to test my skills in finishing games, building game concepts, and overall just learning how to make games. So I want to try building an original game concept or idea based on an existing game, and ideally do it while finishing the game. My biggest focus for this project is going to be planning. I want to know how I'm going to change it. I gave myself a set of goals and a set of restrictions to follow for the month, so hopefully I can go through as smoothly as possible. The goals: try and finish in 1 month, obviously, either the full game or even if it's just a demo of the game, it should be playable. Add some sort of combat or RPG mechanic, and template your game after something else. No random ideas. The planning. I picked a bunch of games I want to use as a template in different genres. I wrote down how I thought they might turn out or how they might be difficult to develop. Ultimately, the one that I chose was a top-down action RPG. Immediately when I say that, you think Diablo. But no, Zelda. See, Zelda to me, because I'm old, is a 2D action RPG style game. I wanted to make a game that could be simple, and the classic Zelda series did seem like something I could do within a month's time. But, you know, me being greedy, I did add some things to it. So I added in the Quintet Trilogy. The Quintet Trilogy is a trilogy of RPG style games that comes from the SNES era. They are Soul Blazer, Illusions of Gaia, and Terranigma. So I remember these games from years back, and to me they rivaled the early Final Fantasy games. They basically were Zelda meets Final Fantasy, and since that's exactly what I'm going for, I figured why not take some ideas from there as well. See, I grew up playing games from the early SNES era, not because I grew up that young, but because we still had those systems in the house. So when we didn't have any brand new games to play, me and my older brother would still play some of the older games, which was amazing for me because I had the ability to see old games and new games while I was young. If I'm gonna be making new games every month, I figured why not use that to my advantage and kind of steal some of those old ideas I know about or old concepts I've heard about and try to make them new. See, today's Breath of the Wild is how people think about Zelda, but to me, I know Link from his 2D form. Growing up, my favorite games were Oracle of Seasons and Ocarina of Time. I have so many ideas for this series, but hopefully I can make the game without over-scoping if I just plan it just right. So that's the idea going into this project. While I was planning, I let my imagination go crazy. I wrote thousands of ideas. Whatever I could think of, I tried to write it down and get it on paper, just so I can kind of have a board of ideas I can just pull from. Once I finished doing that, I went back and I broke down the game into smaller chunks. So the total game idea might be a large scale with RPG mechanics, action RPG, combat. It might be that's the larger vision for the game, but I broke it down into smaller sections. Instead of 3 biomes, what about 1 biome? Instead of a robust story with different NPCs, what if it was just an arcade style game, right? The goal was to find ways to kind of still have the same idea, but continue to minimize it. And I'm glad I did that because unsurprisingly, the one that I think I'm gonna end up making is the smallest version of that. So the idea was this: what if you take classic Zelda and add in some cool movement abilities like jump, dashing attacks, blocking, different things like that, and expanded it in a way. A big hook in the original Zelda games was the idea to pick up items to open doors, to pick up pots, to reveal switches, to even pick up enemies. You could use this mechanic in a lot of different ways. What if you expanded that out into more of the core game loop? What if you could drop weapons or shields or throw them strategically? What if you can pick up items for your left or your right hand? Right? This was my idea, taking something that was already there, expanding it out, and then pulling back on other ideas. So the game basically ended up being Zelda Baseball. Since I had to go with the smaller arcadey style of the game, I figured I would lean into the more ridiculous aspects of that mechanic. So essentially, there are magical orbs that you can use to pick up, throw, and even use them to cast different abilities. Enemies can interact with them as well. Ideally, if I have enough time to make that. Your goal is to find the large orbs and collect them all and reach the end of the game. Very simple, very arcadey. Using these orbs, preventing enemies from getting these orbs is all important part of the game and the combat. It's a simple idea, but it does have a large execution barrier. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to pull it off in a month in the way that I see it in my head, but it is possible, so let's give it a try. The biggest issue I've had with this project so far has been over-planning. I went into this thinking planning was the most important part, and now it feels like it's become the biggest problem of the project. Instead of over-scoping, I spent way too much time planning. In fact, most of the first week was spent planning the game. This made it even more difficult to pivot when I hit any issues in development. In the beginning, I was struggling with the art, and I kept designing the art over and over and over again. When I actually started putting the game together, it did feel good, but I had lost a large amount of time. Regardless of how the project turns out, I feel I learned how to properly plan. So not only can I do it faster next time, I do think I know that there are legitimate dangers to over planning your project. So I should be able to avoid that in the future. As it stands now, the biggest roadblock for me is enemies. I was able to get some different type of enemies into the game, but all they can do right now is just walk and emote. So enemy AI is a huge part of the project, because while I was planning for combat and RPG mechanics, I forgot that you have to give the player something interesting to fight. Flying enemies, crawling enemies, walking enemies, it is a large undertaking that I completely just didn't realize. I have about 5 days remaining. A lot of the game is already, but I left out some key mechanics: the combat, the enemy AI, and the inventory system. These things themselves can all take a week to develop. My thought was, if I can get the game to look and feel good, maybe whatever time I have left, I can cut down on some of those mechanics and those features and still have a game that looks and feels finished. Even if it meant cutting combat down, even if it meant limiting the amount of enemies or removing the inventory system, at least the game would still look and play as intended. I'm kind of sort of testing my own theory about where you should start your project, because in the past I would have jumped straight into these larger concepts and I would have had a great combat system and AI would have had different feats and skills. But now I started with the 3 C's, as I've spoke about in my last video, which is the character, the camera, and the controller. Previously, working on it the old way, I would have had some mechanics that I would have had to throw together into some sort of an interesting level, and that would have been the game. But now I feel like I have somewhat of a designed world a little bit and a decent look and feel to the game, and now I'm just trying to put together some interesting gameplay loops in it. So we'll kind of see which one would have been worse or which one would have been better, but it is an interesting idea that they are 2 approaches to the same thing. Overall, the project has not been doom and gloom. Following the 3 C's has been a great framework, and it has made the game fun to play so far and fun to play test. The character turns out, using the artwork flow that I developed and spent a lot of time on, it is easy to kind of throw characters into the game that look the same. Even though the main character's design is not finished, it still looks better than anything I've done so far, and it actually kind of makes me feel like, you know, I'm getting there. The camera does have a basic zoom in and zoom out approach right now, and I was able to use some plugins to kind of fade out objects that get in between the player and the camera in order to make the game more fun to play and more intuitive. While it doesn't look amazing, it looks good enough for 1 month of a game project, and I'm taking that W. I'm taking it. The controls feel nice. You can strafe and lock directions, as well as dash, as well as jump. And all of these mechanics are lifted from the Quintet trilogy of games. It feels really good to have a freedom of movement in a game like this, and I find myself jumping around and testing the features a lot just because it's so much fun to play. This gives the controls and the camera some nice interplay and some good game feel, which I will say is entirely luck. While I'm disappointed in some areas, I am really proud of others, and looking back on where I've come from and what I've learned, I do feel really excited for the future of the Game of Month series. Let's see how it plays out. The final devlog for this should be me finishing this game, releasing it on itch.io for you guys to play for free, regardless of the state that it's in. I want to laugh with you guys about the game and have opinions and really just, share what I'm doing with you guys. And hopefully I can throw in some planning for the next game that I'm going to be working on for the following month. So stay tuned. I appreciate you guys watching. Thank you.